So, in the civilian business world, if a manager happens to promote the wrong person, or, a human resources department fails to properly train an employee,
Hmm.
the consequences are usually pretty measurable.
Right.
But they're ultimately survivable. I mean, a company loses some revenue, a project timeline slips by like a few weeks.
Maybe a client gets frustrated, takes their business somewhere else.
Exactly. But if the United States Air Force promotes the wrong person,
Yeah, it's a whole different game.
if their talent management system fails to properly evaluate a mechanic or a leader or an analyst, a multi-million-dollar fighter jet could literally fall out of the sky.
Or a critical intelligence intercept gets missed.
Right. So welcome to our deep dive. Today we are opening up a playbook where the stakes of human resources are, quite literally, global security.
Hmm.
We are exploring the United States Air Force enlisted personnel system.
And it is an incredibly complex, fascinating system. We're looking specifically at the regulatory frameworks, Chapter 7, 8, and 9 of Air Force Handbook 1, that dictate exactly how an enlisted airman is developed
And assessed.
and assessed, and ultimately how they're promoted. Because this isn't just about reading a manual.
Right.
It's about understanding the underlying logic of a massive bureaucracy that has to function perfectly under the most extreme conditions imaginable.
Absolutely. And I want to welcome you, the listener, to this conversation. Because whether you're managing a small startup team of 3 people or you're an executive at a company of 3,000, there is something really profound to learn here.
There really is.
Because when I was looking through our sources for today, I kept thinking about medical diagnostics.
Oh, interesting. How so?
Well, when you break your arm, right, you go to the hospital, they take an x-ray, and you see that jagged white line. The doctor points to it and says, there it is, broken.
Yeah, it's binary. Clean.
Exactly. But when you try to evaluate human performance, that x-ray machine usually breaks down entirely.
Mm-hmm.
In the corporate world, promotions are so often murky. It's about, who you know.
Or what high visibility project you got assigned to.
Right. Or whether your boss happens to like the way you format your slide decks. I mean, it is incredibly subjective.
It's the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters. Civilian human resources often rely on a tremendous amount of gut feeling.
Yeah.
But the Air Force, they cannot afford gut feelings. They need a machine.
And that is the mission of our deep dive today. We're going to distill this really dense stack of military regulations to extract that system logic.
We want to understand how you build an X-ray machine for human potential.
Yes, because when you strip away the acronyms and all the military jargon, what you are left with is a highly calibrated parallel universe.
It really is. It has its own internal university system, its own ruthless evaluation framework.
And a promotion system based on an almost terrifying mathematical precision.
Well, if you want to understand a machine that complex, you can't just look at the final output.
Right, you can't just look at the Chief Master Sergeant at the top.
Exactly. You have to start with the raw material. You have
Yeah.
to look at the blueprint of an airman from the absolute ground up. The Air Force calls this the continuum of learning.
Let's start right there. Force development and structure. So the sources break this continuum into 3 distinct levels of leadership. And this isn't just about, getting older or getting a pay bump.
No, not at all.
It's a fundamental rewiring of how a person thinks.
Precisely. The framework outlines 3 phases: tactical expertise, operational competence, and strategic vision.
Okay.
Let's look at the foundational level, tactical expertise. When you enter the force, this is where you live. Your primary focus is on mastering core technical skills and completely assimilating into the Air Force culture.
So learning how to be a specialist.
Exactly. How to fix the engine, how to process the intelligence, how to secure the perimeter. The leadership aspect at this level is incredibly localized.
It's team leadership.
Right. You're learning to influence your immediate peers, motivate a small group of subordinates, and really internalize that warrior ethos.
So you're heavily focused on the self, basically. You're learning how to be an airman and how to do your specific job without making catastrophic errors.
Exactly. But then comes the pivot. The second level is operational competence, and this is where the psychological shift happens.
Okay, what does that look like?
You're transitioning from being a primary technician to being a leader of people who do the technical work.
Ah,
The expectation is that you are developing a broader understanding of the Air Force perspective. You aren't just turning wrenches anymore.
you're managing the wrench turners.
More than that, you are integrating diverse capabilities. You're building teams, negotiating with different units, and inspiring larger groups of people. You are leading complex teams.
And then you reach the pinnacle, right? Strategic vision.
At the strategic vision level, the focus shifts entirely away from the tactical execution of the job.
You're not fixing anything anymore.
Not with your hands, no. You are now combining highly developed personal competencies with broad organizational competencies to lead exceptionally complex, multi-tiered organizations.
Wow.
You're looking at the enterprise perspective. How do thousands of airmen achieve synergistic results across the globe? How do you employ military capabilities across the entire Department of Defense? You're operating in the realm of long-term effects and national strategy.
You know, I was reading this structure, and I immediately thought about the corporate world, and specifically the Peter Principle.
Oh,
For anyone listening who isn't familiar, the Peter Principle is this management concept that says in a hierarchy, people tend to rise to their level of incompetence.
Right. You perform well in your current role, so you get promoted.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Until eventually you are promoted into a role that requires skills you simply do not possess. And there you stay, incompetent.
It's a huge problem in civilian sectors.
Yeah. Like you have a brilliant software engineer. She writes the cleanest code in the company.
Right.
So management says, she's amazing, let's make her the director of engineering.
Right.
But writing code in a dark room and managing 50 people, handling budgets, and resolving interpersonal conflicts, those are two entirely different skill sets.
Completely different.
So the company loses its best engineer and gains a terrible manager. Does the Air Force structure actually prevent this?
It is actively engineered to dismantle the Peter Principle before it can even take root.
Really?
Yes. The system explicitly acknowledges that the skills that made you successful at the tactical level will not automatically make you successful at the operational or strategic level.
That makes so much sense.
The foundational competencies have to shift. The framework categorizes these competencies into 4 areas: developing self, developing others, developing ideas, and developing organizations. The system forces a transition. As you move up, the emphasis radically shifts away from developing self and moves heavily toward developing organizations. The Air Force educates you on the next level of leadership before it ever expects you to actually execute it.
Which maps perfectly onto the actual enlisted force structure tiers. Let's break down the physical ranks, because I think it brings this philosophy into reality.
Let's do it.
So, there are 3 tiers. First, you have the junior enlisted tier. This is your Airman Basic, Airman First Class, and Senior Airman.
Firmly in the tactical expertise realm. In this tier, the focus is entirely on adapting to the military lifestyle, achieving absolute occupational proficiency, and becoming a productive member of the team.
They're the ones doing the heavy lifting.
They are heavily supervised. They are learning the customs, the courtesies, and the core operational tasks of their specific career field. They're the hands-on workers.
Then you cross the threshold into the non-commissioned officer tier, the NCOs. This includes the staff sergeant and the technical sergeant.
Yeah.
And I really want to put a massive spotlight on the technical sergeant, the TSGT. When I was going through the sources, the description of this specific rank really stood out to me. It says technical sergeants are often the unit's technical experts.
The technical sergeant is arguably the most critical point of failure in the entire machine.
Wait, really? The most critical?
Yes. Think about it. A staff sergeant is a highly skilled technician who is just beginning to take on supervisory duties, but the technical sergeant is the linchpin. They are continuously striving to develop as technicians, supervisors, and leaders simultaneously.
I actually like to think of a military unit as a vehicle.
Okay.
The junior enlisted are the engine, right? They're generating all the raw power and doing the explosive heavy lifting.
Right.
The senior enlisted leaders at the top are the steering wheel, deciding where the vehicle is actually going. But the technical sergeant, they are the transmission.
That is a perfect analogy. The transmission converts the raw power of the engine into actual coordinated forward movement. The technical sergeant has to bridge the gap. They have to understand the microscopic technical details of the job well enough to train the junior enlisted, but they also have to begin internalizing that operational competence we talked about.
So they can translate the intent of the senior leaders into actionable tasks.
Right. If the technical sergeant fails, the transmission drops and the vehicle goes nowhere, no matter how hard the engine revs.
That's a lot of pressure on the TSGT.
Immense pressure.
And above them you have the top tier, the senior non-commissioned officer tier, or SNCOs, the master sergeant, senior master sergeant, and chief master sergeant.
These are the heavyweights, the leaders in the profession of arms. When you become a master sergeant, you're actively transitioning out of being a first-line supervisor and into a leader of operational competence.
And senior master sergeant.
By the time you reach senior master sergeant, you are merging team talents and resources across entirely different organizations.
Oh.
And the chief master sergeant, by law, they make up an incredibly tiny fraction of the force. They hold strategic leadership positions with tremendous influence. They are mentoring junior officers, advising commanders, and operating entirely in that strategic vision space.
But rank isn't the whole story. The Air Force also uses duty titles to clarify exactly what someone's scope of responsibility is. It's not enough to just walk into a room and say, I am a technical sergeant.
Yeah.
What is your actual job? The hierarchy of titles is incredibly specific. Supervisor NCOIC, which stands for Non-Commissioned Officer in Charge Section Chief, Flight Chief, Manager, and Chief. Why go through the trouble of separating rank from duty title?
Because in a crisis, clarity is literally life or death. The logic here is immediate visual recognition of authority and scope of responsibility.
Okay, break that down for me.
A supervisor is a first-line leader. An NCOIC is in charge of a specific work center. A section chief has at least 2 subordinate work centers under them. A flight chief is the enlisted leader of an entire flight, which is a massive operational chunk of a squadron.
It scales up.
It scales up perfectly and removes all ambiguity. If a building is on fire or a base is under attack and you run into the section chief, you instantly know their exact operational footprint, regardless of whether they happen to be a technical sergeant or a master sergeant. It prevents the chaos of overlapping authority.
That makes total sense. And beyond those standard operational titles, there are these highly selective special positions. 2 really caught my attention. The Senior Enlisted Leader, or SEL, and the First Sergeant. Let's talk about the SEL first.
The Senior Enlisted Leader is a fascinating, highly influential role. They serve as a key advisor to the command team at the squadron, group, or even headquarters level.
So they're not just managing the day-to-day.
No, they aren't just managing the daily mission execution. They are advising the commander on the readiness, health, morale, and quality of life of the entire enlisted force under that command.
They're like the pulse takers.
Exactly. They interpret policy, enforce standards, and represent the commander's intent to the enlisted force, and conversely, they represent the enlisted force's reality back to the commander.
Which brings us to the First Sergeant. And I have a bone to pick with this one. I really need you to explain this paradox to me.
Okay.
The sources describe the First Sergeant as a time-honored, career-broadening position. They are dedicated entirely to the morale, welfare, and conduct of the personnel in their unit. They are the ultimate problem solvers for the people.
Yes.
But they're also the ones who handle discipline. How does that work?
Sure.
How do you build trust with a young airman when you are simultaneously the unit's counselor and its executioner? Doesn't that contradict itself?
It is the great paradox of military leadership, for sure. But it functions beautifully in practice.
I'm skeptical.
You have to look at the First Sergeant as an entity slightly outside the normal operational chain of command. If you're a young mechanic, your immediate supervisor, your technical sergeant, is the one grading your technical work.
Right.
But if you are going through a brutal divorce, or you're facing financial ruin, or conversely, if you got a DUI over the weekend, that goes to the First Sergeant.
So they are the executioner.
They are the executioner, yes, in the sense that they manage the administrative wreckage of your failure. They handle the cold, clinical reality of discipline.
Right.
But because their only job is the health and discipline of the force, they are also the ones who can advocate for you. They can walk into the commander's office and say, "Sir, this airman messed up, but here's the context, and here's how we're going to rehabilitate them."
Oh, wow.
They are the ultimate backstop. The trust comes from their absolute uncompromising fairness. They aren't grading your wrench turning. They are managing your humanity.
That makes a lot of sense. They are the shock absorbers for the human element of the squadron.
Exactly.
And if we take that concept of enlisted advocacy and scale it up to the absolute highest level, we get the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force,
Yeah.
the CMSF. I absolutely loved the historical context provided in the sources for this role.
It's a critical piece of history. The CMSF is the senior enlisted leader of the entire Air Force. They advise the Air Force Chief of Staff, the Secretary of the Air Force, and even the Secretary of Defense on all enlisted matters.
The ultimate voice.
They are the ultimate unified voice of hundreds of thousands of enlisted airmen.
But the role didn't just exist from day one. I mean, the Air Force was established in 1947, but this role didn't come around until the late 1960s. The context here is wild.
It really is.
The Air Force Association proposed it in 1964. Then in 1966, a congressman named Mendel Rivers actually introduced a bill mandating that each service branch have one senior enlisted member.
Which was a massive legislative overreach into military organizations.
Right. Congress telling the military how to structure its leadership.
But it was driven by necessity. The military landscape of the 1960s was complex. The Marine Corps had already seen the value of this and created the Sergeant Major of the Marine Corps back in 1957. The Army followed suit with the Sergeant Major of the Army in 1965.
So the Air Force was just lagging behind.
The Air Force was lagging behind, and the enlisted force was feeling increasingly disconnected from the top brass.
Right. So even though Congressman Rivers' bill didn't officially pass into law, the Air Force leadership saw the writing on the wall. They saw the massive grassroots support for it. So in October 1966, General John P. McConnell preemptively announced the creation of the position. And in April 1967, Chief Paul W. Airy became the first CMSAF. He wore that completely unique rank insignia with the wreath around the star. It's such a perfect example of an institution being forced to evolve by a combination of internal pressure and external political reality.
It is. And
Yeah.
to feel that evolution over the decades, to build someone capable of going from a brand new 18-year-old airman basic all the way to a strategic leader advising the Pentagon, you need more than just on-the-job training.
Right.
You need a massive formalized educational ecosystem. The Air Force is unique in how aggressively it insists that its enlisted force is not just trained, but formally educated.
This blew my mind. The Enlisted Professional Military Education Pipeline, or EPME, it is relentless. In the civilian world, you might get promoted to manager and get, a weekend seminar, a couple of webinars.
Maybe a PDF to read.
Exactly.
Oh.
In the Air Force, you have to go to actual rigorous schools before you can assume the mantle of leadership.
Exactly. Before you can even pin on the rank of Staff Sergeant, you must complete Airman Leadership School, or ALS.
What actually happens in ALS? Because you mentioned earlier that shift from tactical to operational. How does a classroom teach that?
ALS is a psychological pivot point. It takes a young airman who, for the last 3 or 4 years, has only ever been responsible for themselves. They have been one of the guys.
Yeah.
ALS rips them out of that comfort zone. It forces them through situational exercises where they have to write disciplinary paperwork for their peers.
Oh, that's got to be awkward.
Very. It puts them in simulated leadership vacuums where they must take charge. It systematically breaks the mindset of being a follower and forces them to grapple with the isolation and burden of command. It teaches them how to supervise, how to communicate, and how to operate as a professional warfighter.
And it never stops. Before you can become a master sergeant, you, usually as a technical sergeant, must complete the NCO Academy, or NCOA.
NCOA scales the complexity up. It's designed to prepare you for intermediate leadership. You are no longer just learning how to tell 3 people what to do. You are learning how to operate critically in complex, volatile environments. You're studying organizational management, military history, and joint operations.
And to become a senior master sergeant, you attend the SNCO Academy. And if you make chief, there's the chief leadership course. It is a continuous, inescapable loop of institutional education. But that's just the purely military side. What truly astounded me in these sources is the CCF, the Community College of the Air Force.
Ah, yes. The CCF is a profoundly unique institution, and its impact on the socioeconomic reality of the enlisted force cannot be overstated. It was activated in 1972, and it was granted degree-awarding power by Congress in 1976.
Signed into law by President Gerald Ford.
Yes. It is the only community college system nested entirely within the Department of Defense, and its scale is staggering. It serves over 270,000 students.
Wow.
It issues over 1.6 million credit hours a year. By many metrics, it is the largest multi-campus community college system in the world.
But here's the thing. It's not just an aggregate of random credits. It is a highly structured associate of applied science degree. To earn it, you need 60 semester hours.
Right.
The breakdown is fascinating. 24 hours of technical education, which you largely earn from your actual grueling Air Force job training, 6 hours of leadership management and military studies, 15 hours of program electives, and 15 hours of general education, English, math, humanities. Now, let me play devil's advocate here for a second. Why does an aircraft mechanic or a sniper need college-level humanities credits?
Yeah.
Why does the Air Force care if they can write an English essay?
It comes down to cognitive flexibility and strategic communication. A mechanic who only knows how to turn a wrench is incredibly valuable at the tactical level, but if that mechanic becomes a senior NCO, They are going to have to write policy proposals. They are going to have to justify multi-million-dollar budgets to a wing commander. They're going to have to analyze complex geopolitical reality.
Ah, I see.
The CCF ensures that the highly technical training the Air Force provides is supplemented by the critical thinking skills taught in general education. It builds a more lethal, adaptable, and articulate warfighter.
And it's an incredible recruiting and retention masterstroke. It validates the airmen's technical expertise and gives them a fully accredited civilian degree.
Exactly.
And they supplement this with programs like AFH Air Force credentialing opportunities online. I read about this and I was genuinely jealous. I would kill for something like this in the private sector.
AFH provides up to $4,500 during an airman's career to pay for civilian, industry-recognized credentials, certifications, and licenses that map directly to their Air Force specialty.
That's huge.
It is. So if you are an Air Force mechanic, you can use AFH to pay for the exams to get your FAA airframe and power plant certification. If you are in cyber, you get your top-tier IT certifications.
It makes the airmen infinitely more competent while in uniform and highly marketable when they eventually transition out. It's a win-win.
Mm-hmm.
And they manage all of this career development through a tool called MyVictor. It's a web-based mentoring and experience tracking tool. It tracks your special experiences. It matches you with mentors based on weighted characteristics. I mean, it's like if LinkedIn, a corporate HR dashboard, and a college advisor were all rolled into one massive enterprise solution.
It provides absolute transparency. It allows the individual airmen to take ownership of their own path while giving career field managers at the Pentagon the hard data they need to place the right people in the right places at the exact right time.
Okay, so let's pause and summarize where we are. The Air Force has spent millions of dollars educating and building this perfect technical sergeant. They've been through ALS, they've been through NCOA, they have their CCAF degree, they are technically proficient, and they have civilian certifications. But here is the million-dollar question. How does the massive machine actually measure if any of that worked?
Yes.
How do you grade someone whose job might be launching weather satellites or maintaining bomber aircraft or analyzing signals intelligence? You can't just look at quarterly sales numbers or profit margins.
And that brings us to the operational reality of the system. Part 2 of our deep dive, the report card. Assessments, evaluations, and retention. This is where the philosophical system logic meets the daily grinding reality of leadership. And it all begins with the Airman Comprehensive Assessment, or ACA.
The ACA. The regulations describe this as a formal two-way communication between the raider and the raidee. But knowing what we know about the Air Force, this isn't just a casual chat over a cup of coffee to say, hey, keep up the good work, is it?
Not even close. It is a highly structured, legally mandated feedback loop. Raiders are required to document the session, discuss standards, expectations, and goals, and objectively indicate the ratee's level of performance.
Wow.
There is highly specific paperwork for this. If you are evaluating an Airman Basic through a technical sergeant, you must use AF Form 931. If you are evaluating a Master Sergeant through a Chief Master Sergeant, you use AF Form 932.
And the timeline for these forms is incredibly strict.
It has to be, because human nature is avoidant. The initial feedback session must happen within 60 days of supervision beginning. Then there's a mandatory midterm feedback session halfway between the time supervision began and the projected performance report closeout date.
Okay, I want to push back on this, or at least play the skeptic.
Go.
In the civilian world, we talk a lot about organic mentorship. The idea that leadership shouldn't be forced. If I have to fill out a Form 931 every single time I want to give my subordinate feedback, isn't there a massive risk that leadership just becomes a compliance exercise, a box-checking activity rather than an actual human connection? Doesn't this hyper-structured process kill organic leadership?
That is a very common civilian critique, but it misinterprets the reality of large-scale management. Organic mentorship is wonderful when it happens, but it is deeply inconsistent.
Okay.
What happens when a supervisor is introverted and conflict avoidant? What happens when a subordinate is defensive? In the corporate world, what usually happens is the manager avoids the difficult conversation for 9 months.
Yeah, that happens all the time.
Then, at the annual review, they tell the employee they are failing and dock their bonus. The employee is blindsided, angry, and defensive. The Air Force system, with the 60-day initial and the mandated midterm ACA, guarantees that no airman is ever blindsided.
Yeah, do I see?
The compliance forces the conversation that human nature wants to avoid. It establishes a baseline. You are legally required to tell them exactly what the standard is and exactly where they are failing or succeeding, with enough time for them to actually fix their behavior before it goes on their permanent record.
Mm.
It doesn't kill organic mentorship. It ensures a minimum standard of leadership exists, even when organic mentorship fails entirely.
Wow, okay, that entirely shifts my perspective. It's a safety net for bad communication.
Exactly.
And when it comes time to write the actual performance evaluation, the report card that goes on their permanent record, the rules for documenting performance are just as strict. The sources state that a performance statement must have two elements: the action taken and the impact or result.
Yes. The system has zero tolerance for fluff. You cannot just write, Sergeant Smith is a hard worker who always gives 110%. Adjectives are practically useless.
So what do you write?
You have to write, Sergeant Smith rebuilt 3 F-16 engines during a surge operation, resulting in a 20% increase in sortie generation and the successful deployment of the squadron. Action. Impact. It must be quantifiable.
But what happens when things go wrong? We've talked a lot about building people up, but military discipline is notoriously strict. How does failure actually look on paper? What happens when that technical sergeant or critical transmission fails to apply these standards?
This is where the tone of the regulations becomes incredibly clinical and, frankly, unforgiving. The core expectation is fair and equal treatment. Therefore, failure to document misconduct is viewed not just as a mistake, but as a disservice to all airmen who serve with honor.
Oh, wow.
When it comes to adverse actions, the administrative wreckage of professional failure, the text demands ruthless specificity.
Ruthless specificity.
Yes. Vague comments are strictly legally forbidden. In a civilian HR file, you might see an error in judgment led to an off-duty incident, or exhibited conduct unbecoming of a manager. The Air Force system completely rejects that.
It demands the cold, hard facts.
It demands cold, matter-of-fact reality. The exact example the text provides is stark. Master Sergeant Smith drove while intoxicated, for which he received an Article 15. Or, Captain Jones made improper, sexually suggestive, and harassing comments to a squadron member, for which he received a letter of reprimand.
There is absolutely no hiding behind HR jargon there.
There is zero cover, and the system enforces mandatory reporting requirements, particularly regarding sex-related offenses and civilian criminal convictions. If an airman is convicted by a court-martial or has a substantiated allegation of a sex-related offense, it must be permanently tracked.
It follows them.
It requires a mandatory notation on the member's next performance report. Unit commanders are required to review the records of all newly assigned personnel to ensure they are aware of any history of these offenses. The system is meticulously designed to ensure that offenders cannot hide their history from current, subsequent, or higher-level commanders.
The administrative fallout is absolute. It sounds like the system acts as an immune response.
It is exactly the immune system of the Air Force. It identifies and isolates failure. If a technical sergeant fails to document a subordinate's misconduct, they are compromising the integrity of the entire machine. Evaluators are forced to ask, did the action bring discredit on the Air Force? Did the mission suffer? Was unit morale affected? Is there a pattern of misconduct? If the answer is yes, it must be documented.
Which feeds directly into our next big concept, retention. Who actually gets to stay in the Air Force? Because a lot of people think you just sign up, do your time, and you can stay indefinitely until you hit your 20-year retirement, but that's not true. There is a gatekeeper.
A very strict gatekeeper. Enter the Selective Reenlistment Program, or SRP. This program applies to all enlisted personnel. Commanders must evaluate first term, second term, and career airmen to ensure the Air Force only retains those who consistently demonstrate the capability and willingness to maintain high professional standards.
They look at everything.
They look at your performance reports, they look at your duty performance, they look to see if you have any unfavorable information files, which is exactly what it sounds like, a central file for your disciplinary wreckage.
So it's not a right to re-enlist, it's a privilege that you have to earn. Your commander looks at your entire record and literally decides if you deserve to stay.
Yes.
And if you are not selected for reenlistment, you are handed an AF Form 418, denial of continued service, and you are out. Now, there is an appeal process based on your time in service, which can escalate up to the group commander, wing commander, or even the Secretary of the Air Force, but the baseline is you must be chosen.
Correct. But here is where it gets incredibly complex. Even if your commander says you are stellar and you have perfect evaluations, you still have to contend with macro-level supply and demand mechanics. And that is managed through the Career Job Reservation Program, or CJR.
This part fascinated me because it's pure, brutal economics applied to human resources.
Exactly. The Air Force has a legally mandated end strength. Congress dictates the maximum number of people the Air Force can have on active duty. And within that cap, the Air Force needs specific numbers of people in specific jobs, known as AFSCs, or Air Force Specialty Codes.
Right.
If everyone wants to be a cybersecurity analyst and no one wants to be a heavy aircraft mechanic, the mission completely fails. So the CJR program manages quotas for first-term airmen.
Right. The regulations talk about constrained versus unconstrained career fields. If you are in an unconstrained field, meaning the Air Force desperately needs as many of you as they can get, you automatically get a CJR when you hit your reenlistment window. But if you're in a constrained field, meaning there are more airmen who want to stay than there are open slots, you have to fight for your job. You have to compete for a limited quota. Your commander has to recommend you, and it goes to the group commander level for approval.
Exactly.
If you don't get a CJR allocation, you cannot reenlist in that career field. You either retrain into a shortage field or you pack your bags and separate.
It is a ruthless but necessary mechanism to prevent surpluses and shortages. But look at the flip side of that equation. How does the Air Force keep people in highly technical skills with demonstrated retention shortfalls?
Yeah, that's a huge issue.
How do they keep a cyber warfare operator from leaving for a $200,000 job at Google? Or how do they retain a special warfare operator whose training costs the government millions of dollars?
They use Wall Street tactics. They pay them. The Selective Retention Bonus, or SRB.
The financial incentives can be massive. The SRB is a monetary incentive paid to airmen serving in critical military skills who re-enlist for additional obligated service. It is broken down into zones based on your total active federal military service.
So it depends on how long you've been in.
Right. Zone A is between 17 months and 6 years. Zone B is 6 to 10 years. Zone C is 10 to 14 years. And Zone E is 18 to 20 years.
And the math on this is wild. The sources lay out the exact formula. It's 1 month's base pay multiplied by the number of years you are re-enlisting for, multiplied by an SRB multiple. This multiple is assigned to your specific career field by the Pentagon based on how badly they need you. And it maxes out at a staggering $100,000 per zone.
I just find the irony so compelling here. You have an organization built entirely on concepts like selfless service, patriotism, and sacrifice.
Sure.
But when the rubber meets the road, they have to deploy brutal, algorithmic, free market economics to keep their critical talent from walking out the door.
It is pragmatic. You cannot fight a modern war on patriotism alone. You need technical mastery. And technical mastery has a market value. And the system's precision regarding this money is exact.
Give me an example.
The base pay used for the calculation is based on your rank on the day prior to reenlistment. The text uses a great clinical example. If you're promoted to Staff Sergeant on May 1st and you reenlist on May 1st, your $100,000 bonus is calculated on your lower Senior Airman base pay from the day before. The system gives nothing away for free. Wow. Okay, so we've seen how the evaluation system catches failure, maintains standards, and uses brutal economics to balance the force. But the Air Force isn't just a massive corporation. It's a military branch fighting wars.
Yes.
And while they have a robust system for paperwork and bonuses, they also have a deeply historical, fiercely revered system for recognizing the absolute pinnacle of human bravery and achievement.
Which brings us to part 3 of our analysis, the Hall of Heroes, the Awards and Decorations program.
Now, early on in this deep dive, we talked about X-rays. It's easy to write a Form 931 saying an airman fixed a jet. It's easy to calculate an SRB bonus. But how does a rigid math-based bureaucracy measure the unmeasurable?
It's a real challenge.
If an airline runs into a burning fuselage to save a trapped pilot or holds a perimeter under intense enemy fire, you can't just put that on a standard performance report. How does the system quantify extreme human valor?
It does so by creating a completely separate, highly protected currency of respect. But first, we have to distinguish between different types of recognition. The sources make a very clear distinction right up front between campaign or service awards and decorations.
So let's break that down.
A campaign or service award generally recognizes your participation in a specific military campaign, operation, or your attainment of a requirement. For example, the Global War on Terrorism Expeditionary Medal or the Antarctica Service Medal. It signifies that you were physically there participating in a significant operation.
You deployed, you served in the theater, you endured the hardship, you get the ribbon. It's geographical and temporal.
Exactly. A decoration, however, is entirely different. A decoration requires an individual nomination, extensive documentation, and formal approval by high-level commanders.
It's not automatic.
Not at all. It is awarded for specific acts of valor, heroism, exceptional service, or outstanding achievement that clearly place a member far above their peers. members. You don't just get a decoration for showing up, you get it for doing something extraordinary.
And there is a strict hierarchy to these decorations. Let's walk through the heavy hitters at the absolute top of the pyramid, starting, of course, with the Medal of Honor.
The Medal of Honor is the highest decoration for heroism in military action. It is awarded for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of life above and beyond the call of duty while engaged in action against an enemy of the United States.
The highest honor.
It is so significant, and the burden of proof is so extraordinarily high that it is generally presented personally by the President of the United States.
And the historical context provided here is amazing. The first Air Force recipient of the Medal of Honor was Major Bernard F. Fisher, presented by President Lyndon B. Johnson in 1967 for action in South Vietnam. He literally landed his aircraft on a battle-torn airstrip under heavy enemy fire to rescue a downed fellow pilot.
Incredible.
And there's a tradition tied to this medal that I think speaks volumes about military culture. It is not required by law, but out of immense respect. All uniformed members render a salute to a Medal of Honor recipient, regardless of rank. You could have a 4-star general, someone who commands hundreds of thousands of troops, and if they encounter a 20-year-old airman wearing the Medal of Honor, that general will initiate the salute. The rank bows to the valor.
It is a profound acknowledgement of the human element superseding the bureaucracy. Just below the Medal of Honor is the Air Force Cross. This is the second highest decoration. It's awarded for extraordinary heroism that is above the requirements for all other combat decorations, but perhaps doesn't quite meet the absolute threshold for the Medal of Honor.
Then you have the Silver Star, the third highest military combat decoration awarded for gallantry in action. And I want to pause on a very specific iconic medal, the Purple Heart.
Ah, yeah.
We all culturally know what it means. It's awarded for wounds received or death after being wounded in action against an enemy. It is a literal mark of spilled blood. But the sources note a very specific post-911 update to the criteria.
Yes, and it reflects the changing nature of modern conflict. The criteria were expanded to include service members on active duty who are attacked by a foreign terrorist organization that specifically targeted them due to their status as a member of the U.S. Armed Forces.
That is a fascinating legal and philosophical shift. The battlefield is no longer just a defined front line in Europe against a uniformed foreign army. The threat environment is completely asymmetrical. You could be targeted in a city or on a base simply for wearing the uniform. The definition of combat had to evolve.
The bureaucracy had to adapt to the reality of the warfighter. So those are the individual decorations. But the text also dives heavily into unit awards. The Presidential Unit Citation, the Gallant Unit Citation, which was specifically approved in 2004 for post-9/11 operations, the Meritorious Unit Award, and the Outstanding Unit Award.
Now, I have to ask about the psychology of this. I need you to help me understand this.
Right.
If I'm in the corporate world and my whole 50-person department gets a wooden plaque that says, "Great job, team," for Q3, as an individual high performer, that feels pretty meaningless.
Sure.
I might have done 80% of the actual work, but the guy who slept under his desk gets the same plaque. Why is it different in the military? Why do airmen care so deeply about a ribbon awarded to their whole squadron?
It's an excellent question, and it comes down to two very distinct factors: exclusivity and the synchronized nature of military survival.
Okay, exclusivity first.
These awards are strictly mathematically capped. The regulations explicitly state that for the Air Force Outstanding Unit Award, commanders can only recommend 10% of similar units assigned to their command annually. It is a legally restricted honor. It means your unit genuinely, demonstrably outperformed 90% of its peers.
Wow, okay, so it is mathematically impossible for it to be a participation trophy.
Far from it. Second, you have to understand the nature of modern military operations. An F-22 pilot cannot execute a combat mission alone. It is impossible. That pilot's success relies entirely on the intelligence analysts who found the target, the maintainers who spent 14 hours fixing the jet's avionics, the ammo troops who loaded the munitions, the fuel troops who drove the trucks, and the air traffic controllers who cleared the airspace.
An entire ecosystem.
A Gallant Unit Citation recognizes that extraordinary heroism or combat success was the result of the entire massive machine working in perfect, synchronized harmony under incredibly difficult and hazardous conditions. When you wear a unit award, you are not wearing a corporate plaque. You are wearing the legacy and the shared survival of everyone who stood next to you.
Okay, That makes perfect sense. It's a shared survival metric. So let's tie all of this together. We have the forced development and the massive educational pipeline. We have the ruthless, legally mandated evaluations and feedback loops. And we have the medals and decorations honoring extreme achievement and shared valor. But in the military, your rank dictates absolutely everything. It dictates your pay, your level of authority, the scope of your operational responsibility, and even your living conditions. How does all of this data, the college degrees, the evaluation forms, the Purple Hearts, feed into the ultimate decision? Who actually gets promoted?
This is the crescendo of the entire system logic. Part 4, the climb, enlisted promotions. And to understand how this machine selects its leaders, we have to start with the mechanics of advancement and the severe constraints placed upon it.
Because there's a ceiling. You can't just promote everyone who does a good job.
A very hard, unyielding ceiling, mandated by public law. The Department of Defense strictly limits the number of airmen who may serve in the top enlisted grades. For example, by law, the authorized average of enlisted members in the pay grade of E9 Chief Master Sergeant cannot be more than 1.25% of the enlisted force.
1.25%, that is tiny.
For Senior Master Sergeant, it's 2.5%. The quotas are tied to physical year-end strength, congressional funding limits, and projected vacancies. You cannot promote someone to Master Sergeant unless there is a vacant Master Sergeant billet available for them to fill.
So it is the ultimate zero-sum game. You are competing for a limited, mathematically defined number of spots. And how the Air Force manages that fierce competition is through the Weighted Airman Promotion System, or WAPS.
Yes.
And there is a brilliance to this system that I want to highlight because I think civilian HR departments could learn a lot from it. You only compete against people in your exact same Air Force specialty code, your AFC.
That is a crucial systemic point of fairness. The regulations emphasize that the Air Force makes promotion selections within each AFSC, not across all AFSCs.
Right, because an aircraft mechanic isn't competing against a cybersecurity analyst or a dental hygienist or a military police officer. Their jobs are fundamentally too different. Their operational tempo, their deployment rates, their daily stressors are completely different. You compete exclusively against your peers who are doing the exact same job you are doing. It isolates the variables.
Exactly. But before you can even step into that arena to compete, you have to endure the waiting game. The eligibility timelines are intense. Let's look at our technical sergeant again, our critical transmission.
Okay.
To even be eligible for promotion to TSGT, a staff sergeant needs a minimum of 5 years' time in service and 23 months' time in grade as a staff sergeant. They also must possess the 7 SIL level in their primary AFSC, meaning they have reached an advanced level of technical certification.
And all of your data, your time in service, your evaluations, your decorations, is locked in on a specific, unyielding date.
The promotion eligibility cutoff date, or PALED. For technical sergeant, that date is January 31st. Whatever your record looks like at 11:59 p.m. on that date is what the system uses. If your commander approves a medal for you on February 1st, it does not count for that promotion cycle. It's too late. The line is drawn in the sand.
Okay, so you meet the time requirements, you hit the PSCD, now you have to face the crucible, the testing. And this is where the WPS system gets its teeth. Because your evaluations matter, but you also have to prove you actually know what you are doing.
Eligible airmen take 2 tests. The Promotion Fitness Exam, or PFE, which measures military and supervisory knowledge based entirely on the Air Force Handbook, and the Specialty Knowledge Test, or SKT, which measures broad technical knowledge specific to their career field. These tests are written by teams of senior NCOs airmen writing for airmen to ensure they are highly relevant and operationally accurate.
And the scoring is brutal. You need a minimum score of 40 on the PFE and a minimum of 40 on the SKT. But here's the kicker. You need a combined score of 90 to even be considered.
Right.
So if you bomb the PFE and score a bare minimum 40, you have to score at least a 50 on the SKT to stay in the game. It demands a balance of general military knowledge and specific technical mastery.
And these are highly secure, electronically scored tests. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the entire promotion testing culture is the absolute draconian rule regarding how you prepare for them.
Yes. The ban on group study. When I was reading the sources, I read this section 3 times because it is so entirely counterintuitive to everything we are taught in the civilian world. In college, group study is highly encouraged. In corporate training, it's mandated. You get together, you share notes, you quiz each other, you build teamwork. Teamwork makes the dream work right.
Not in the Air Force promotion system. The text is unambiguous and legally binding. Group study for the purposes of enlisted promotion testing is strictly prohibited.
And if you violate it, it's not just a slap on the wrist. Your manager doesn't just pull you aside and say, hey, study alone next time.
No. It is a violation of Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, failure to obey a lawful general regulation. The clinical fallout, the administrative wreckage of this violation is staggering.
What happens?
Conviction by court-martial can result in a dishonorable discharge, forfeiture of all pay and allowances, and confinement in a military prison for up to 2 years.
Wait, really? 2 years in prison for studying with a buddy? I need to understand this. Why? Why is the Air Force so paranoid about group study?
Because of the foundational system logic we've been discussing since the beginning, the WPS system is designed to be a mathematically pure, unbiased meritocracy. It relies on the absolute integrity of the test score as a metric of individual knowledge and effort.
So if you study with a group.
The text explains that this prohibition protects the integrity of the program. If you study in a group, human nature takes over. People share pretests, they share recalled questions from previous years, they share consolidated study notes or highlighted materials. Suddenly, you aren't testing an individual's mastery of the handbook, you are testing their access to a study group's collective intelligence.
Wow.
You cannot put study software on government computers. Your promotion must be a reflection of your own individual mastery of the material, untainted by anyone else's input. It must be a mathematically pure individual metric.
Wow. It's an incredibly lonely path to advancement, but it is undeniably fair. Okay, so that's how you make technical sergeant. You study alone in your room, you pass the PFE and SKT, you get your points tallied up, and if your total score is above the cutoff line for your specific AFSC's quota, you promote. It's binary. It's an algorithm. But what happens when you try to move into the senior NCO ranks? When you try to make master sergeant, senior master sergeant, or chief?
The math is no longer enough. The tests alone cannot measure the operational competence or strategic vision required at those levels. You can't take a multiple-choice test to prove you can lead a 500-person organization. When moving into the SNCO ranks, a central evaluation board takes over.
The room where it happens, this is where the tension really peaks.
Exactly. The Promotion Evaluation Board. And this board score accounts for over half of the total promotion points for SNCOs. The board is divided into panels based on career field backgrounds. Each panel consists of 1 colonel and 2 chief master sergeants. And the board president, overseeing the whole process, is always a general officer.
I love the mechanics of how they actually score the records. It is so meticulously designed to eliminate the kind of subjective bias that plagues civilian HR.
It is a masterclass in controlled evaluation. Before they even look at a live record of an actual candidate, the panel goes through an extensive trial run process using practice records. They review them, they discuss them openly, they calibrate their expectations, and they establish a consistent scoring standard for that specific AFSC. Everyone competing in that AFSC is judged against that same collectively established standard.
And then the actual scoring begins.
Using a secret ballot with absolutely no discussion allowed, each of the 3 panel members reviews the record and scores it using a 6 to 10-point scale in half-point increments. The ballots go straight to a recorder. The minimum score you can get is an 18 3/6s. The maximum is a 33 10s. That score is then multiplied by 15 for the final board score.
But I want to paint a picture of what happens when things don't align. What if the colonel looks at the record and thinks the airman is a rock star, a 9.5, but one of the chiefs looks at the same record and thinks the airman is barely average, a 6.5?
This is one of the most brilliant checks and balances in the entire personnel system, the split vote resolution. If panel members disagree on a record by more than 1 point, say an 8.5, an 8.0, and a 7.0, it triggers an immediate halt to the process. The record is returned to the panel.
Imagine the tension in that room. It's like a jury deliberation. You have a general officer sitting at the head of the table observing. A chief master sergeant scores a package in 8.5, and a colonel scores it a 7.0. The whole room stops.
Exactly. By law, they were now forced to openly debate the record among themselves. The chief who scored it in 8.5 has to look that colonel in the eye and aggressively defend why this mechanic deserves to run a massive organization. They have to justify what they saw in the performance reports and the decorations. They must debate, advocate, and argue until they align within that acceptable 1-point variance. If they absolutely cannot agree, the deadlock is escalated to the general officer serving as the board president for final resolution.
That is incredible. It completely neutralizes rank-based intimidation. You can't just secretly give someone a low score because you didn't like the font on their evaluation or because of some subconscious bias. You will be forced to justify that score verbally to a colonel and a chief if you deviate too far from the consensus. It prevents any single rogue evaluator from tanking a candidate's career.
It ensures consistency, equity, and absolute rigor. But, and this is a massive but, the board can only evaluate what is actually physically in the record, which places a massive final burden of responsibility back on the individual airman.
Right, the data verification record, or DVR.
The DVR is the single document utilized for promotion consideration. It is a snapshot of the airman's data, their evaluations, their decorations, their duty history, as of the promotion eligibility cutoff date. The regulations explicitly state that all eligible airmen must register their DVR in the personnel systems.
Because if a medal you earned is missing from the system, or your latest evaluation didn't load properly, the board will not see it, and they cannot score what they cannot see.
The text warns, very clinically, that supplemental promotion consideration may not be granted if an error appeared on the DVR and the individual didn't take the necessary steps to correct it prior to the board. It is the ultimate expression of individual accountability. The system is designed to be fair. It goes to extraordinary lengths to remove bias, but it will not hold your hand. If you do not verify your own data, you accept the administrative consequences of your negligence.
So we have gone from the day an 18-year-old airman enters basic training, learning tactical expertise, all the way to a general officer reviewing their record for Chief Master Sergeant. If we zoom out and synthesize this entire stack of handbooks, what are we really looking at?
We are looking at a closed-loop, highly calibrated ecosystem. It is an organization that completely controls its own talent pipeline from cradle to grave. It demands continuous learning through the CCF and EPME. It insists on rigorous, brutally honest, and legally documented feedback through the ACA and EPRs. It honors immense sacrifice and synchronized teamwork through its decorations. And it enforces a strictly mathematical, peer-reviewed, and deeply scrutinized descent to power through WAPS and the evaluation boards.
It is a masterclass in organizational design. Whether you are listening to this and you manage a team of 3 people at a tech startup, or you are an HR director for a Fortune 500 company, the Air Force's obsession with clear expectations, specialized training, and unbiased promotion metrics is something to deeply study. There is no ambiguity. You know exactly what is expected of you, you know exactly when you will be evaluated, and you know exactly how you will be judged against your peers.
It systematically removes the subjectivity and the gut feelings that plague so many civilian organizations. It replaces the who you know with what you know and exactly how you performed.
But that leads me to a final provocative thought. I want to leave you, the listener, with something to mull over today. We live in a modern business world that constantly praises disruption. Silicon Valley tells us to move fast and break things. We are sold this idea that rigid hierarchy is the ultimate enemy of innovation, and that we need flat organizations where anyone can pitch an idea and there are no rules.
And the Air Force system is the exact polar opposite of that philosophy. It is incredibly rigid, heavily standardized, and utterly predictable. It is bureaucracy weaponized.
Exactly. But when the stakes are nuclear deterrence, global security, and life or death in combat, does this highly structured, unyielding path to advancement actually stifle maverick innovation? Or, and this is the counterargument, does it provide the exact psychological safety and structural foundation necessary for true innovation to occur? Think about it. If you don't have to worry about office politics, if you don't have to worry about whether your boss likes your personality, if you know the system will evaluate you fairly based purely on your performance and your test scores, does that actually free your mind to innovate within your technical specialty? Does the rigidity of the X-ray machine allow the human potential inside it to flourish?
That is the ultimate tension within a military bureaucracy. Structure versus agility. And the answer to that question likely lies in the hands of the technical sergeants, the critical transmissions of the force, who have to navigate that system and bridge that gap every single day.
So the next time you look at a corporate promotion cycle and it feels a little messy, a little subjective, remember the X-ray machine. Building an X-ray for human potential takes millions of dollars, hundreds of pages of regulations, and an absolute uncompromising commitment to the system logic. It's not easy, and it's definitely not always pretty, but when it works, it produces the leaders that guide the world's most powerful Air Force. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the systems around you, and we will see you next time.